threshold of damnation.
The tyrant stood in his accustomed position on the bridge, his expression stony, as he gazed out of the viewing arch at the planet below. The War Master had come to Vigilus. It was a sizable world, and well defended. That much was obvious by the naval presence dotted around it, and the ident runes of a score of loyalist chapters scattered across the viewing arch's vintage interface. They were in disarray, battered by the brutish Xenos that had intuited the immense value of this planet as the way station closest to the northern end of the Nakmand Gauntlet, one of the only known stable routes into the Imperium Nihilus. But the Imperials would fight, and hard. He wouldn't have it any other way. When he claimed Vigilus, he would do it in fire and splendor. The hoarse breathing of his captive played on the cusp of hearing, disturbing his reverie. Abaddon cast a glance towards the fallen Space Marine, his ruined body impaled in a dozen places by the blades of the possessed that had brought him. The War Master noted the smears of blood that had clotted in a dozen places across his broad, once handsome face. Breaking loyalists. It never lost its charm. His time would come. And soon. The War Master looked around the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit and bathed in its magnificence. Vaulted gunnery alcoves ranged its edges, many tall enough to fit an Imperial knight inside, with the murderous servitors of the Dark Mechanicum flesh-melded into their cabled intestines. Sparks of warp fire wound through the air, exhaled by the mighty ship's gargoyle-mouthed venting pipes. The grille underfoot was stained rich brown with spilt blood. They were the marks of history, those fallen droplets. Some had come from the veins of the hated Emperor himself, the blood of a god, as some would have it. Yet more had come from the angel Sanguinius, rich dark spurts of it, spattering in a great measure. Abaddon smiled as he flexed the talon of Horus, borrowing its memory of the Primarch kill, savouring it once more. At his back, the demon sword Drachnaen seethed, jealous of its rival weapon's prominence at the time and in that place.
Rest easy. You will drink the blood of heroes soon enough.
You will destroy only yourself, coughed his Space Marine captive. Bright blood joining the dried gore on his chin and spattering his bright yellow armour. Dash yourself to pieces on the aegis of this world.
You amuse me.
His deep bass tone had not a shred of mirth.
Every court has its jester.
The Space Marine coughed once more and fell silent. Abaddon could feel his hatred boring into the back of his head. It was invigorating. The Vengeful Spirit would have his forces on the planet within the hour. The vessel was an ancient god of war, cast in the form of a Gloriana-class battleship. His battleship. After 10 long millennia, he felt part of it, body and soul. The great ship had only been made more potent over the ages by the raw hatred of the warp, the dark energy that coursed through its bilges. That other famous flagship of the Black Legion, the Planet Killer, had its uses, and he was using it well, even now, but he would rather die than abandon the spirit. Behind the flagship came 100 macro-class vessels and more, contingents from the Stygius war zone and the infernal forges of Nemendgast joining it with every new day. It would be easy enough to overcome the battered naval presence before them. The spirit alone was a broadsword matched against knives, and it would hack a bloody hole in the paltry defence before them. The War Master revelled in the feeling of being on the threshold of victory. Did his predecessor, Horus, ever take a moment to relish his anticipation before launching a critical strike at the Emperor's false domain? Abaddon felt certain that he did. Oftentimes he had been there in person so long ago. But Horus had failed. Horus was weak. Where Terra had stood, Vigilus would fall. A full half of the galaxy would be cut off from the Emperor's light. Then could begin the endgame. Then, with his prey crippled, he could make ready for the kill.
"Have the World Claimer attend me,"
he said, turning to the beast-masked sorcerer already etching an atomogrammic rune of summonation upon the deck.
"I would hear of the promise he has made on my behalf."
"As you will it, War Master," said the sorcerer, bowing low. He was careful not to make eye contact as ever. A coward, that one, but useful. The scent of burning human bone wound through the bridge as the incense of communion was lit, and the rough syllables of the dark tongue growled out of the sorcerer's voxplate, echoed by a dozen of its acolytes. The air above the octagram began to shimmer, as if in a heat haze, and then resolve. The red eye lenses and distorted maw of the World Claimer swam into focus, lit from below by 8 candles of flesh tallow. The sorcerer bowed and retreated into the shadow.
"Hearken,"
said the War Master.
"Speak."
"We have brought fire and damnation in your name, my lord, but not conquest," said his herald, his voice overlaid with a dozen demon echoes. "Not yet."
"And I am conquest given form,"
said the War Master, opening his arms wide.
"And here I am. Who stands against me?"
"The Lord Macrack, 4 of his fellow masters and their chapters, the sisters, the Soriatus, the knights of the Daruvar and the Terran, and the soldiery." Abaddon sighed and looked away in disgust.
"I am disappointed in Gulliman's lack of foresight,"
he said.
"The head of that pompous fool, Calgar, on my bridge, will have to do."
"Time runs short," said the herald. "I spoke of this planet's doom 2 lunar months hence. The Hellspear bit deep as ever. The claim was made. Yet the planet's defenders believe it to be an idle boast."
"It could not be more true,"
said Abaddon, his hand straying close to Drachnayen in its scabbard to reassure it that slaughter was close at hand. He motioned for the greater teleportarium decks to be activated, and a clutch of servitors spasmed into sudden life.
"This world will burn, that much is certain, and become that which it hates the most."
He smiled, his pointed teeth the leer of a shark. "You will die to a man," his Space Marine captive, venom under the agony in his voice. "Vigilus will not fall."
"Enough!"
Abaddon made a curt gesture, extinguishing the incense bowl and thus ending the communications with his herald. He strode over to the captive, drawing Drachnayen from its scabbard. It made a slick, ugly sound, like that of a cinder drake licking its fangs. The demon sword screamed in hideous anticipation as its glowing tip was lowered towards the captive's throat. With a deft and practiced flick, the War Master gouged out the fallen warrior's glands with the tip of his hateful blade. The captive spat at Abaddon, acidic spittle sizzling on the War Master's boot.
"Show him."
The demon sword Drachnayen glowed as it let the Space Marine glimpse the full futility of his struggle before his death. His eyes went wide. "No," managed the loyalist.
"Oh, yes,"
said Abaddon, nodding sagely.
"Vigilus has already fallen."